legislature of the state of New York and what's happened with the destruction of our criminal justice system by those Albany politicians that currently run the state legislature and our governor. Governor Hochul might say a lot of things, but she cheerleaded all of Andrew Cuomo's policies that went and eliminated cash bail, that created discovery reform, that made our streets less safe because criminals run free while our cops wear handcuffs. It's absolutely the wrong direction that our state is in. And we've seen it time and again. You watch the footage out of New York City and what's happened, but that same thing has happened here. We're joined by a great team of law enforcement officials here, with our next governor, Lee Zeldin. We have our sheriff-elect, John Garcia. We have, thank you so much, and congratulations, our great sheriff, Tim Howard, who has admirably served for 3 terms. Our state senator and former sheriff, Pat Gallivan. And then we have our Congressman Lee Zeldin, who is going to save our state and be the next great Republican governor of this state. But you saw it in results in local elections around the country. And you saw it right here in Erie County. Law and order was on the ballot. They elected a law and order man as sheriff of this county in John Garcia. We elected law and order district attorneys on Long Island and law and order candidates all across the state that would reform the mess that was created by Democrats, drunk with power, that wanted to liberalize this system. They were defeated in this last election. Elections have consequences, and we have to understand that, and they're going to have consequences again. And if you elect Republican candidates, they support our law enforcement officers. They support, having judges have real discretion in these cases so that people that are a threat and a menace to society are kept behind bars. So I'm going to start off by introducing our state senator, Pat Gallivan, who has given his whole career to keeping our community safe, but then also serving us so well in the state senate. Senator Gallivan?
Thanks, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Congressman who started in the state senate with me. I appreciate him coming out to Western New York, talking about this very important issue, and then, of course, Sheriff Howard, Sheriff-elect Garcia. I'm thrilled to have them here with me. You have heard elected officials over the years, politicians over the years, talk about government's most important responsibility to protect its citizens, to protect its people. We heard our former governor, in his words, say that government's most important responsibility is to protect, and I'm quoting, protect its people. We now hear the new governor talking about 2 different things. Her job is, on one hand, to protect the economy, and then talking about protecting our people. New York is failing when it comes to criminal justice. After, I think it was 20 years of declines in criminal conduct, the rates of crime across the country and here in Western New York, after 20 years of decline, because of many things, because of good police work, because of better techniques and training, because of the citizenry willing to participate and work with law enforcement, because New York had laws that stood behind police officers and public safety, we saw rates continue to go down. That changed about 2 or 3 years ago. And what we've seen in the last couple of years is criminal justice policies that favor offenders over law-abiding citizens. Time and again. We see it in the discovery laws. We see it in the bail laws. We see it in the relaxation of the laws and supervision relating to parole, among other things. We've now seen, I think the number is an 80% increase in shootings across the state, manifested mostly in cities. Just down the road in Rochester, 2 months ago, in the fall, for crying out loud, they had a record number of homicides in a given year, and every homicide that takes place there contributes to increased homicides there. More of a record that hopefully will never be beaten again. We can only reverse this by changing the laws, by having people that are standing up as the elected officials, standing up for the citizens and trying to ensure their safety, starting with the laws, providing the support then for law enforcement. The bail law in particular, the fact that a judge cannot consider somebody's criminal history, that a judge cannot consider if an individual is dangerous and whether or not that person should be held. The fact that we don't do that in New York State is costing people a lot, people's lives. We see it each and every day. The sheriff sees it. The people are arrested. They come into the holding center here to get fingerprinted, fill out their height, weight, fill out the arrest forms and all that, and they're back out on the streets, regardless of the fact that they just victimized somebody. And they victimized somebody last week and last month and last year. It needs to change. And until we change the laws, we are going to continue to see increases in violence and increases in victimizations. I have put forward legislation to permit judges to consider public safety. We can provide it for everybody, the number, the reference, if you're interested in that. But that we are one of only, I think, one of only 2 states where judges cannot consider public safety and the dangerousness of an individual, whether or not to remand them, hold them, set bail, whatever it might be. The answer is very simple. It can't stand. If it does, we'll continue to see people victimized. We'll continue to see increase in violence, increase in our crime rates. We need people in elected office who stand up for the public, who stand for public safety. I worked with Lee Zeldin years ago, and I know what his voting record is. I know his support for law and order is something that will benefit all of our citizens. And we need to change. And if this governor won't do it, we need a different governor to be able to do it. I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate the fact that all of you are here, and I won't give up on changing these laws until we can get that done. Thanks, everybody.
It's great to be back in Buffalo. Senator Gallivan, thank you for your service. In many ways, your uniform, right now in the New York State Senate, I grew up in a trooper household. Sheriff Howard, Senator Gallivan, they're retired troopers. Sheriff-elect Garcia, it's great to be with you. Chairman Langworthy, who's been traveling the state so much, he's been everywhere, crisscrossing New York over these last few months especially, making a big difference. And if anyone is in government right now, if you're the governor of the state of New York, if you're in charge of the state assembly, the state senate, if you want to have your finger on the pulse of what New Yorkers want, that means that when you go back to Albany in just a couple of weeks, right at the top of your list of things to do should be to repeal cashless mail. All across New York, wherever I go, I could be in the reddest, most conservative Republican counties in New York. I could be in the most Democrat, liberal, blue counties in New York. And people are talking about the desire to support law enforcement more, not less. They want to feel safe being able to walk their streets again. And as they see, not just with the implementation of cashless bail, but the less is more bill that gets signed. Kathy Hochul releases 191 people from Rikers Island, and a whole bunch of them immediately go back out and commit additional offenses. 6 upstate prisons get closed. But Governor Hochul talks about how maybe we should focus more on drug treatment centers. Yeah, well, you just closed as one of the 6 a drug treatment center. This backwards approach, while our corrections officers across the state are facing even more danger every day on the job because people in office don't have their backs. And right now the average New Yorker feels like Governor Hochul and those controlling the state assembly and state senate don't have their backs, don't have their family and community's backs. So we hear stories of someone who's released for arson and then a week later gets charged with a double homicide. Somebody robs a bank, gets released 5 hours later. They are rearrested for robbing more banks. I stood in front of a synagogue in the Bronx where someone had vandalized a whole bunch of synagogues, and we predicted this person would soon get caught and then they would be immediately released. Sure enough, 2 days later, they were caught, charged with over 40 offenses for infringing on religious freedom, caught vandalizing these synagogues, they were immediately released. We all saw the high-profile Christmas tree in New York City that was just burned down. That arsonist, yeah, that's a story of being released on cashless bail. You saw it in another state. What happened in Waukesha? That story started with that suspect getting released for $1,000. Our judges are in a position to be able to measure dangerousness and flight risk and their past record and make decisions that are best for the criminal justice system and best for making sure our streets belong to law-abiding citizens instead of belonging to criminals. Making sure the handcuffs are on the criminals instead of the cops. That's what we're focused on as we travel the state. Making sure that this state, instead of attacking safety, we are defending it. And if anybody in Albany in just a few weeks, from Governor Hochul on down, wants to do something about it, I suggest you put at the very top of your list, repealing cashless bail.
Most of you know my 50 years in law enforcement, or almost 50, is about coming to a close. But I think I can categorize what we see in this bail reform has been nothing. This catch and release bail reform program is nothing but a con by politicians from Albany and downstate that are trying to convince the good, intelligent people of the state that crime is down in our state because prison populations are down. When in fact it's just the opposite. Crime continues to increase because of the releases that are being made. The congressman wisely commented or suggested or noted that there may be some future attempts to come up with drug treatment facilities for the individuals that are committing crimes. Those treatment facilities should exist before they shut down. The only opportunity that inmates have now to get any kind of drug treatment is when they're arrested. We routinely have parents calling us, asking us to go and find their children so that we can arrest them and get them off the dangerous drugs that they're taking before their next visit, the next time they see them is in a morgue somewhere. They're absolutely right with what they're saying. We do have a drug treatment program here. We have a very award-winning drug withdrawal program. However, the inmates that are out committing crimes in order to feed their drug habit are being arrested, brought into the facility, immediately being released without any treatment at all, only to go back out in the streets to commit additional crimes to fuel that drug habit. Environmental conservation agencies from across the country encourage a catch and release program. They know that that is resulting in bigger fish. The exact same thing is happening with the catch and release program that the correctional people are pushing on us now, that the criminal justice system is pushing on us now. We're catching and releasing criminals only to send them out on the street to become bigger criminals. So I applaud these efforts to change the wrong that's been done, and can't see it happening soon enough.
Thank you everyone for being here today to talk about such an important issue. Everyone is in agreement that, and that's law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the community, that bail reform has failed, and we need to reform bail reform. We need a common sense approach to bail reform, which is, let's put it back in the hands of our judges. They have the information. Bail reform bail shouldn't be a punishment to those that are indigent. However, bail reform forgot to take into consideration the safety of the victims, the witnesses, and the community. And because of that, we've had a tremendous surge in violence, and it's affected everyone. How would you like your family, who were victimized by a burglar, to be let out that same day and stand across the street and intimidate your family, your kids, and so forth? We cannot have that. So again, I very strongly urge everyone to get behind this issue. It's a very important issue for us now, and bail reform, again, needs to be reformed. Thank you.
Any questions? Questions for anybody? was interesting to me when we saw in New York City is, progressive as they are there, and as far left policies that we see in Albany coming out of New York City, the most conservative of the candidates in the primary won and was elected mayor, making public safety his number one issue. I think we need people like him and people like this to be standing up. I think the compromise is simple. We empower our judges to use their good judgment to help keep people safe, and we have to insist that dangerousness of the individual that's arrested is part of the equation when the judges considers whether or not to release the individual. Now, do you want to add anything?
Is there any data or numbers about re-release and crime rates here in the area? Because you're saying it's increasing.
Well, I do know statewide shootings are up in the past year 80%. Deaths are up 80%. There have been more homicides in New York State in the past year than there has been in 20 years. So those are numbers I know. I do not know off the top of my head the crime rates in the city of Buffalo, Rochester, or anywhere else in the state without looking at them. I don't know, Sheriff John, if you have anything available for you?
I would add, so the crime rates are up, but on top of that, something else to consider is that you're seeing in certain places, it's happening a lot in New York City, where because of prosecutors, DAs focused on their next primary in a place like Manhattan, they're not prosecuting a lot of low-level offenses anymore. So the crime rates are going up, but it actually would be going up even more if they were prosecuting all the crimes that are being committed. But unfortunately, law enforcement is not being empowered. DAs aren't going after so many different charges because of those who, instead of saying a crime was committed, let's investigate, let's prosecute, a debt is owed to society, instead you have politicians, like I just saw last week while I was down in Washington, D.C. with my colleague, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, saying that organized retail theft isn't even happening. It's not even taking place. I remember when I was in the state senate with Pat Gallivan, and we were tackling organized retail crime. That was a huge issue for retailers in this state. But with Democratic politicians, you have prosecutors who don't have the backs of law enforcement, prosecutors who aren't going after low-level offenses, and they should, and then politicians saying there aren't even crimes taking place, it's just all fake. So while the crime rates are going up, it'd be even higher.
Well, let me also add, when you talk about numbers, I think it was just last week we saw our district attorney announce that they had to dismiss several hundred cases because of the new discovery laws, that they didn't have enough time to gather all that information to be ready for trial in a certain period of time. How fair is that to victims? How fair is that to our communities that rely on law enforcement and the laws to help keep them safe? So the numbers are there. I think a lot of times what you see in reporting of crimes, you see a lag of things that take place, and we wait till mid-year before we see the prior year's crime stats. So I think we're ultimately going to have hard, fast numbers available for everybody, and they're not going to be predictable.
Of course, there have been individual instances where someone who's out on bail as a result of bail reform has reoffended. I mean, to be fair, can you point to a specific analysis or evidence that bail reform is directly related to crime increasing? I mean, just to be fair, of course, there have been cities and states that did not enact bail reform. We've also seen crime increase.
They have, but they have not seen it as the rate that we've seen it in New York. New York has clearly surpassed everybody in the increase in violent crime, shootings, and homicides. Rochester, there was an individual that was out on bail, ends up driving under the influence, drives in a number of people and killed at least one. I forget the exact details of that particular case. Early on when we had this, there's a bank robber in New York City. Got arrested. Gets out on an appearance ticket. Robs another bank. Gets out on an appearance ticket. 6 times he did it. He said to the media as he's walking by in handcuffs, I can't believe they'd let out a person like me. And ultimately what happened, he was charged with federal crimes and he was remanded. He was a danger. we have these instances across the city. I know there was one in particular, I wish I could remember the details, in Buffalo, where there was an individual that was involved in illegal possession of a weapon that was given an appearance ticket back out on the street and ultimately shot somebody. And I don't know if the sheriff or sheriff-elect has specific cases, but they do exist across the state.
There are two cases, a little different than what you asked, and I can't give you the names on either, but we have two cases of individuals that were released from this facility because of bail reform and because of the parole rethinking, softening of parole practices. Two individuals that died as a result of their drug use within a week of being released from the facility that would not have happened had they stayed here. The media, you have to recognize yourself. There's an old axiom about justice or punishment in order to be effective must be swift and sure. There is absolutely doubt that in New York State it is now neither. It is not swift. It is certainly not sure. You've seen yourself delays in trials that are 2, 3, 4 years later before cases are going to trial. These individuals now with bail reform are back out on the street. It's true they haven't been convicted of the current crime, but they all have criminal records from before. Probably before this was enacted, Albany sent people here allegedly to study the bail reform problem and to see what the conditions were. We suggested that they look at the individuals and see what their life history has been like and let the judges use that information. It's clearly going to determine whether or not they're going to come to court. So if they were too irresponsible to go to school, they were too irresponsible to maintain jobs, they had a life history of various from little to bigger, like this small fish, big fish, but repeated confrontations with law enforcement or antisocial behavior that's got increasingly bigger, and never had the personal responsibility to deal with the small issues, and it just continued on to bigger issues. When we arrested individuals on warrants to go into court in Buffalo, we found out that an individual arrested on one warrant was probably wanted, or often wanted, by 3 different city court judges because they have not appeared for their cases either. So one arrest got 4 more warrant cases closed, but the judges had no choice but to let them go. And we read on a daily basis where the deputies are encountering individuals for traffic violations with as many as 24 suspensions on their license for not answering tickets, and the only option they've got under bail reform is to let them go. So the poor police officers that are thinking how stupid they must appear to be wasting government resources and stopping people for traffic violations that just don't answer the ticket, and the only thing they can do is let them go, to laugh at us, to say we're not answering this one either, and we're fooled into thinking that we've got success. And these same politicians are quickly pointing the finger and blaming law enforcement for the problems that they continue to create.
So it's not just the bail reform, it's the discovery laws too. So you've got the combination of an individual knows if they commit over 90, I think it's about 94% of the crimes, they have to get an appearance ticket and they're back out on the street. They know that's going to happen. So it's a little bit of a timeout just to get your fingerprints taken and the processing to be done. But you also have the discovery laws where witnesses' names, addresses have to be revealed almost immediately. And that's contributed to victims and witnesses being afraid to come forward. And so what you have now out there essentially is a sense of lawlessness, because people, they have no fear of being caught, or if they're caught, no fear of being held accountable for their actions. And who suffers? We all suffer. Everybody. Of course, an individual arrested should be afforded their constitutional rights. They should not be mistreated. Somebody should not be in jail, held on bail because they're poor. But all those law-abiding citizens on the streets of Buffalo, streets of Western New York, across New York State, should not have to fear that individual who continues to harass them, or violates them, or selling drugs on the corner, whatever it might be. The law-abiding citizens should expect others to be law-abiding, and if they don't, then they're going to be victimized. That's not fair to anybody. What's it result in? More victims, higher insurance costs. People don't want to live in a neighborhood. They don't want to live in a city. They don't want to live in places where there are these problems. So we have to be very careful. The sheriff mentioned opioid crisis. He didn't say it that way, but he talked about the person. By a judge being able to say, okay, look, if you don't go here for treatment, you're sitting in jail. That has helped countless people to step into treatment and successfully change their lives. Now they just want to go back to their fix. And so there are a lot of issues, but it all revolves around lawmakers who have put forward policies that have eroded criminal justice and clearly favor offenders and not the rest of us, the overwhelming majority of law-abiding citizens. And that just isn't right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Anybody's
everyone.
time to give an envelope to the congressman.